Alright, hey y'all, we're just going to continue our talk here into the human condition. And we thought to move into the thing called the Vita Activa and the modern age, or these two separate things. Starting out with the, on chapter 6, and the section 35, or subchapter, or whatever, world alienation. Mm-hmm. So she starts out by stating, 3 great events stand at the threshold of the modern age and determine its character: the discovery of America and the ensuing exploration of the whole earth, the Reformation, which by expropriating ecclesiastical and monastic possessions started the twofold process of individual expropriation and the accumulation of social wealth, the invention of the telescope, and the development of a new science that considers the nature of the earth from the viewpoint of the universe. So in each one of these instances we see a sort of reliance in some part, whether it be on navigation or, to science more generally, I don't know what the technical terms would be, moving into the realm of science and what role that necessarily serves in not only conducting knowledge, but of conducting this thing called the human condition, or moving past it in any sort of way like that. So this is where we're going to think about the Archimedean point that we began with, which is that shifting of a point, or rendering the Archimedean point away from the Earth towards that outside the Earth, which is extremely complicated. Mm-hmm. And every time I read this, I wonder greatly what the implications of this really are, because I have a tendency to just kind of want to apply something of an elastic band to this thing called the Earth, or this thing called the human, that can be applied anywhere. So in space, doesn't matter where it goes, as long as it kind of remains stretched and it doesn't break. I don't know what breaking would be like. That'd probably be like an apocalypse or something like that. But as long as humans are involved or anything like that, like, we're still working within the parameters of this thing called the human condition. So what is it about this shift in the Archimedean point for you, Andrew, from the Earth to the outside, that marks something of a shift? Or what is it about it that is interesting for Arendt?
Well, for Arendt, in the Vita Activa and the Modern Age section, it's not that the Archimedean point is located outside the Earth. It's that with people like Descartes and the rationalist philosophical movement, if one could describe it as a movement, has inserted the Archimedean point within the human mind. And this is what she's trying to get at in section 39 on introspection and the loss of common sense, of that human thought or human action is no longer about what takes place in the world, but rather what happens in the brain of these thought processes about which one can be certain. Because in Descartes, there's a kind of destruction of the world through doubt. That can only be ensured through this kind of very expedient belief in a decent God. So that's where Arendt is trying to go with the Archimedean point in this section, especially with the event of the invention of the telescope, where how does she put this? She puts it something along the lines of what has always remained outside the realm of human perception has been introduced to human perception through this tool, which means that everything becomes measurable to what can be experienced in one's own mind.
Yeah, I have a passage here that I think it's the one you're referring to, or it's pretty close. In the experiment, man realized his newly won freedom from the shackles of earthbound experience. Instead of observing national phenomena natural, not national, phenomena as they were given to him, he placed nature under the conditions of his own mind, that is, under conditions won from a universal, astrophysical viewpoint, a cosmic standpoint outside nature itself.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I guess, universal objective gaze from the outside.
Mm-hmm. Which can be placed anywhere.
If you think about it,
Arendt. Yeah. It's all about which place is most convenient for the particular goal.
Yeah, there's a passage that I can't find, but it goes as follows, where for Arendt, taking apart the Ptolemaic system, the PTO.
Oh yeah. No, I know what you mean indeed. I thought you were talking about the Talmud or something. I was like, whoa.
No,
I didn't realize she was discussing the Talmud in this book.
I'm a new.
That'd be very cool if she was talking about the Talmud, though.
How do you pronounce that term, though? Ptolemaic?
Ptolemaic, yeah.
Yeah, okay, alright.
That's like before the Copernican.
Yeah, exactly.
System. Yeah.
So what she says about that, and I can't find that, it's annoying me. In order to destabilize the Archimedean, or the Ptolemaic point, we actually didn't need to rely on, like, scientific advancements to give us the telescope or to give us anything like this. We could have arrived at that point via reason, or via the human mind itself. So she says that it's kind of odd that we have ascribed to these developments, technological developments, this sort of transcendental status, or this sort of privilege in that movement of the human mind or cognition.
I think she says something along the lines of ideas can't change the world, but events do.
Yeah.
Which I have no idea where she might have put that.
Yeah.
But I know exactly what you're referring to.
Right. I found it here. It says, She says that it seems astronomers needed no telescope to assert that, contrary to all sense experience, it is not the sun that moves around the earth, but the earth that circles the sun. If the historian looks back upon these beginnings, with all the wisdom and prejudices of hindsight, he is tempted to conclude that no empirical confirmation was needed to abolish the Ptolemaic system. So we could have done it ourselves, right?
Yeah.
In that way, we didn't actually need to rely on these, on these technological developments to take that apart. But these serve, and this opens up another kind of odd part in Arendt's text, because the fabrication of these instruments, notably the telescope or anything like that, is at the hands of Homo faber, right? So the working individual serves something of a role in the construction of these tools that are then used by certain people that can, be great, or can then be excellent by the use of those very tools. When for her, she doesn't, in my mind, and I hope you'll correct me if I'm wrong, she doesn't want to just say that is the case, where she doesn't want to say that we can just simply ascribe onto that moment, or of the development of the telescope by the hands of Homo faber and then used by Galileo or Copernicus or whatever. We cannot say that is an extension of that Greek experience, or of that human condition experience between labor, work, and then action, because now we've entered into this realm of the scientific, or whatever term we could place there, and that has had a significant impact on what it means to be that very human figure, that very human thing. I don't know what you think about that, if that's fair to say.
It's all associated with the condition of what she calls world alienation.
Yeah.
The difference between the Greek thinkers saying, oh, maybe the Earth moves around the sun, and the invention and use of the telescope, is that the world is the Earth, I suppose, is no longer the most important point in the life of the human being. It's an arbitrary location, rather than an artifice that we've created and to which we belong, and to which we should contribute through labour, work, or action. And she kind of makes, I don't know how justifiable this conceptual move is, but she makes the move from Galileo to Descartes.
Right.
And her argument is, well, Descartes kept up with the progress of Galileo. Galileo was really what inspired Descartes to continue with his product, and that was the catalyst for most modern philosophy, which expresses in philosophical terms the experience of world annihilation. Definitely with Cartesian doubt, and also with the Kantian argument about the thing in itself, where the world remains outside of human experience to a degree. Where were we going?
I was wondering about thinking, like, just transposing these elements of the human condition with work, labor, and action onto another epoch. And
onto another epoch, and like which epoch?
I was thinking about the relationship between Copernicus and Homo Faber, the person that constructs the telescope. But I can put it in another way. How can we say that excellence does not manifest itself today still? Because there are celebrities.
Well,
but then there are like super celebrities, like everyone knows who. Now I'm blank.
Yeah, no, I mean the
Michael Jackson.
We were discussing this the other day, and how Jordan Peterson's described as the best Canadian public intellectuals.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, if we were to make a kind of ironic argument, Jordan Peterson doesn't exist. He exists for the purposes of selling books.
Yeah.
You know, he's the intellectual of labour.
Right.
I guess. I mean, and I think one can really say that about intellectual figures since, let's say the 90s. Let's pick out an arbitrary decade. But where thinkers come and go pretty easily, and it's all about the. Let me put this another way. In the same way that Arendt talks about the downfall of philosophers, she writes that they are either coming up with notions of epistemology that scientists don't need, or they're merely mouthpieces of the Zeitgeist, as Hegel would have them. Well, I need to try and figure out where that piece is, because it's pretty integral to what she said. Okay, so here we go. So she talks about the modern age as the era where philosophy came to play second and even third fiddle, because Descartes was following the discoveries of Galileo, and she writes that the philosophers became either epistemologists, worrying about an overall theory of science, which the scientists did not need, or they became indeed what Hegel wanted them to be, the organs of the Zeitgeist, the mouthpieces in which the general mood of the time was expressed with conceptual clarity. In both instances, whether they looked upon nature or upon history, they tried to understand and come to terms with what happened without them. And this is the complete loss of what she describes as the vita contemplativa. No one really believes in eternal truths anymore, and the scientists or mathematicians who could probably express, who are really the only people who could express what might be close to eternal truths nowadays, just don't, I guess, because of the way that contemporary science progresses, and how each overall theory is supplanted by another one. So there's always that contingency within the science and mathematics as
right,
as an activity, and it does feel like philosophy needs to fall into each of those two subdivisions. Either you're an analytic philosopher who's doing bioethics, or you go into continental philosophy and try to figure out how Marx was right in the 21st century.
right.
And there's no one who is doing what Socrates did, or like Aristotle did in the same kind of
What would
sense.
that look? I mean,
what would that look like? I mean, we referred to Jordan Peterson earlier, and like he definitely falls into the Zeitgeist camp because he's like a politically convenient.
yeah, he's a charlatan
Figure,
for sure. Yeah, that's how like he is in.
And also like Zizek and like the people who are actually.
Yeah.
Like Zizek is.
Yeah,
here or there, but like we could name a bunch of other philosophers who were definitely in the kind of vocalizing the Zeitgeist camp.
Yeah, because in
and this and on another note, this is why Arendt identifies as a theorist rather than a philosopher. So she's excluded from this.
Yeah, because she wouldn't say that to herself. Like she's able to transcend this or something. But like I think of someone like Steven Pinker. He's
he's definitely a Zeitgeister.
Like, but he has all these interesting ideas about the fundamental human truths or anything like that. That, like, it's almost like those are false truths, right? Because at the one time, at least I think Arendt would say so as well. Would be like, no, this is propaganda garbage.
This is also Adorno and Horkheimer. Of like the state of enlightenment today is this kind of false clarity of this. Really facile sense of realism. Yeah,
like 12 basic rules for life.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Go fuck yourself. Like, what, you could reduce this down to 12 rules? Like, I think not, my friend. But there's this moment here, and I want to take this passage to think about the way that science, 268, at the beginning of the part 37, universal versus natural science, where she writes that only we, and we only for hardly more than a few decades, have come to live in a world thoroughly determined by a science and a technology whose objective truth and practical know-how are derived from cosmic and universal, as distinguished from terrestrial and natural laws, and in which a knowledge acquired by selecting a point of reference outside the earth is applied to earthly nature and the human artifice. So in what way then do we, through this sort of scientific endeavor, lay claim to an almost these universal truths that are perhaps more universal than they've ever been? Like we have certain knowledges about the earth itself, perhaps about people with like statistics, yet are so far from the truth. In the same respect, if we can accept Arendt's thesis, like at least in concerning the Socratic way to truth or something like that, where it's not so much truth based on reason or truth based on what these old philosophers may have come up with, but it's a truth based on this, as you stated from Adorno and Horkheimer, this kind of like false clarity or this something like that doesn't actually require any sort of reason, but it falls into the realm of facts.
Yeah.
And then it's from there we can take them in and say, and then really oppressive shit can come from that. And this is very much apparent, not just today, but the time of writing this. Like we were saying earlier, when we took a little break, like Arendt was a refugee coming from, that totalizing schema of fascism that just wanted to eradicate difference in any way it could, under the aegis of a sort of scientific pretension towards superiority or whatever. So I don't really have a question to attach to that, but off the top of my head, on the cusp of fainting, to what extent then does this thing called science differ from this old philosophical reasoning in the attainment of truth, or in that sort of process?
I think that with science, especially the way that it's practiced today, is based in novelty. And I mean, this is the problem that's sort of faced the scientific community since the 50s, whether they acknowledge or not, when the academic journal industry became much more profitable. People had to publish research to get professorial positions.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to publish research, you needed to come up with something new. So this is why you get all of those studies of chocolate causes cancer, chocolate prevents cancer.
Yeah.
Chocolate has no effect on cancer whatsoever.
Yeah.
So you have all of this sort of trivial accumulation of knowledge.
Yeah.
Which no one can really make sense of, because to a certain degree it's contradictory. People cite it in their own articles, because that's how the scientific community is able to publish articles. You need to make sure that there's a basis in the literature, but apart from to put forward your own research. Whereas with philosophy, I mean, in theory and literature nowadays, because we've absorbed this kind of journal-oriented culture from the sciences, it's a lot more grounded, because we feel like we need to have a methodology. I mean, and on a side note, which makes me feel like I'm wearing a tinfoil hat, that whole thing is built into the institution of the university since the Cold War, where each department had to explain how it was more scientific. But because it was completely tied in with research funding, because the US didn't want to be behind the USSR in the development of science, and then that US university culture, because it had so much money behind it, ended up influencing, definitely Canada, and also Europe, which is also a trigger of the student revolts in the 60s and 70s. But we'll save that for a different podcast, maybe called The Truth Is Out There.
Alex Jones has it right. So listen to these. You're gonna take these people seriously.
Yeah, indeed. No, I mean, not Alex Jones, but the Unabomber, definitely.
Right.
Where was I? I mean, with the sciences, they have. It's definitely with the sciences. Their aim is just to. They have a process idea of what it means to get to truth, and it reacts with different discoveries at certain points along the way, and just keeps on going. Whereas philosophical truth, in the DeVito Contemplative, it's eternal, doesn't change, always remains the same. There's this model of how things should be. There's this essence of justice. There's this essence of what is good. Which, I mean, in the way that the dialogues unfold in Plato, you never get to. Do it, always eludes you. But also in this idea of action, I think, which is also a part of what it means to be a theorist, of talking to others in a place where we are equals, and really the aim of society at large is to create a space, this interesse. So really on a side note, we could create that space in an egalitarian way, but the pragmatics of that is not outlined in this book, and I don't think that Arendt would subscribe to it, but I think it's a possible application of her ideas. It is, the philosophical exploration is the truth that we establish amongst ourselves, or the ideas that endure throughout time, past immortality. Whereas with science, it will keep on going regardless. This is why I had the distinction between thought, cognition, and logic in this book is pertinent, because while thought is endless, with the phenomenon of natality, every new birth brings someone new into this world, a unique perspective. So thought is really endless in that respect, whereas logic is unstoppable. Nothing will change the fact that 2 + 2 = 4, and in this scientific view, 2 + 2 = 4 is not this even equation that then balances out into a 4, but it's 2 + 2 = 4, and then what you can do with that 4 is add 4 to it, and then it's 8. And you can add 8 to that, and then 16, and add 16 to that, and then it's 32. It's with science and Arendt's perception, it's this metabolic process like labor.
Yeah, exactly. And the way she states that specifically is that since it followed closely upon the discovery of the Archimedean point and the concomitant rise of Cartesian doubt, has been the reversal of the hierarchical order between the vita contemplativa and the vita activa.
Mm-hmm.
So in that way, the kind of how there is a sort of reliance on, or there's a sort of comfort in knowing that 2 + 2 will always equal 4,
mm-hmm.
and you keep going on in that way. I'm sorry, I didn't want to.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to mess you up there. I feel like you were on a roll.
No, I've rolled off it.
Yeah, because I wonder for my own part, what is... Because I just read The Republic for the first time recently, and...
I know, I'm sorry for you.
I know.
Well, no, it's actually quite fun. I mean, it doesn't...
I love the beginning.
People say.
I love the beginning when Socrates is tearing apart their arguments, but then when he goes into laying out a society, I'm like, oh God, this is boring. But at the same time, well, it is boring, but I wonder to what extent there is more of a risk posed, and by risk I mean like a risk I mean by like the loss, the literal loss of human life in the absorption or the kind of acceptance of a fundamental set of human attributes, and that if anything falls outside of it, it's derivative, it's messed up,
mm-hmm.
or this kind of because I'm just following Arendt, where she sees a fundamental difference between that realm of thought, like the old philosophers, and then science, or in the way that science professes these kind of universal truths, apparently in some way, like 2 + 2 = 4, or whatever. These kind of unchanging, ideas. Which of these pose more of a risk to this thing called humanity? Whereas for me, I think that, as you said before, how that reason was that thing that was kind of open up to change, or was that the term you used? Like that.
If you consider the fact of natality and people entering the public sphere all the time, so I mean, perspectives can change on who is participating.
Exactly.
In speech and action.
So, which one of those poses more of a risk, and which one of those is perhaps the better option?
It depends whether you prioritize mortality or immortality. Is life the highest good, or is excellence the highest good?
I don't know, because then you...
Because we both live in this paradigm where life is the highest good.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, but the biopolitical type realm, for sure. Like, there is nothing more than my extending my life as long as I possibly can. And that's simply it. Keep calm and carry on type thing. Like, just do your thing.
Which is why Arendt wrote this book, because without this book, the kind of immortality is the highest good would have just completely died off, and we'd never talk about it.
So, do you think then that it was this transition, or starting to think about life in terms of mortality, that spurred on the atrocious events of the early 20th century? Because this is very much in the back of her head, I think. Like, she just left Germany. Well, I guess a few years ago. This is the mid 50s. This came out.
Yeah, mid 50s. I wonder if
I'd be curious.
Hear me out on this.
I will.
The Origins of Totalitarianism came out before this.
Yeah.
And that's her book about Europe.
Yeah.
The Human Condition is her book about North America.
Okay. Would it, like, insofar as it wouldn't have been possible for her to write this if she hadn't observed?
No, I think she's talking about the danger of the type of society that the United States
there,
had become. Because you read her comments on that society, and you're like, she's writing in the United States in the 50s.
Yeah,
that's what that's.
But not in
example in her head.
Adornian type way either, though. This was something a little bit different than the just simple.
I think for her the time scale was much larger.
Yeah, sure.
With Adorno, he was thinking about like achromatic music that he was writing in Austria in the early 20th century.
Jazz sucks.
Yeah, indeed. It just satisfies you too much.
Yeah.
Whereas with Arendt, it's like it's a book of someone from Europe trying to cling on to what makes sense to her in a society that doesn't make sense to her.
So if I could frame this another way, what do you think, or where would fascism, or the Third Reich would fall in her framework here?
In the human condition specifically?
Yeah, in this kind of distinction between the scientific type thinking and the old philosopher type thinking, or whatever. Like, these both claims for.
Well, I mean, I just need to borrow.
Or if you want to open up a new category, like, please do.
I need to borrow from Origins of Totalitarianism briefly. But where she talks about.
I think I got it right here.
No, you've got it over there.
It's over there? Okay.
I think your book's
too many books.
You.
It's embarrassing.
But she talks, in the final chapter, she talks about ideology as the logic of an idea.
Yeah.
And nothing can get in the way of that idea.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why she talks. This is why she identifies logic with labour, of life will just keep on going. There's no end to it. It will just power on through. And with the way that science is exercised in the modern age, it's just the following of a logical idea, and also the erosion of what can be described as the public realm. Because I think that's and also in the section about the public and the private realm, where she describes this rise of the social as an way of administering society as if it were a household, and she identifies the household as this place of violence, this place of inequality, and that's what fascism is to an extent. It's this leader who's in complete control of the way that society is run. And also it links to Plato in her conception, the way she describes it in action, of how he viewed humankind as material to be worked on. So the Republic is an act of fabrication rather than a form of action. So, if I can sort of come up with a kind of shoddy maxim. There we go.
Maxim.
There we go. Fascism treats the realm of action as if it were the realm of fabrication.
Okay, yeah.
It's all about treating people as material rather than
Yeah,
agents.
for sure. Yeah. And that would allow them to be not only consumed but disposed of at the same time, which is where the
and within that schema, there's a rift between those who know and those that do.
Yeah, exactly. But
and this is also what she kind of writes about in the banality of evil, in the sense of people who are able to do without thinking. People who are able to do evil without thinking about it, in the sense of thought as a dialogue with oneself.
Right, because they claim that they were just following orders or whatever. But if we think of ancient Greece, and there are moments in the Republic when Socrates is giving the suggestion that if among the guardians, if a father fucks his daughter or something and she gives birth, they must kill the child, shit like that, like the eugenics present in all that stuff. It seems like a pretty messed up sort of formulation, right?
To an extent, Arendt talks about this. I'm trying to find the place where she would do this. Where are we? Let's have a little look. What were we talking about? We were talking about Plato and the Bastard He Was, and
because it seems like these people
where he's writing about the Republic is, in a certain sense, the way that he conceives politics is how the individual should conduct their life. As Arendt writes about Plato's insistence that the city-state must be considered to be a man writ large, and from his construction of a psychological order which actually follows the public order of his utopian city, but is even more manifest in the grandiose consistency with which he introduced the principle of domination into the intercourse of man himself. The supreme criterion of fitness for ruling others is, in Plato and in the aristocratic condition of the West, the capacity to rule oneself. Just as the philosopher king commands the city, the soul commands the body, and the reason commands the passions. And in this conception of what an ideal society should look like, I don't think it admits plurality in any way whatsoever.
Yeah, no, I don't think it does either. But, because we could spend all day. Well, I like to poke holes in it, but it's a weak poking of holes, I will admit. I just throw these epistemological type or these epistemic hand grenades and try to say you didn't consider this, man. But it seems like there is a really glaring omission here in considering the role that eugenics played in consolidating this kind of ideal Greek state that she's so fond of, that I wonder what would be better, like this kind of mass society, because we don't know where mass society will lead, right? Because I'm thinking that she's prepared to say, or she would be prepared to say, that mass society would inevitably lead to that sort of ultimate, end point, that sort of destruction of just like the end of life, if it hasn't already occurred, because it would be naive to assume that just because human beings are still alive, physically, that means that they're still alive, as far as contemplation goes, as far as being philosophical beings or active beings goes. And I really wonder what is worse, the actual loss of life or the loss of that ability to be political agents or active agents. And I don't know, we can't solve this problem now.
Well, it's back to the question of, is mortality the highest good or is immortality the highest good? You have to decide, and if you
Yeah.
come down on one side, then you have to, whatever follows from that, you have to stick with.
Yeah. Oh God. Like Sophie's Choice, right?
I mean, but for Arendt, she knows that these are like fundamental human questions. This is why she titles it the human condition. It's like, okay, I can only really talk about labour, work, and action. And she, as I've said before, she says, I'm not going to talk about thought. I'm not going to talk about thought at all. But she keeps on bringing it up.
Yeah.
I mean, it's constantly on her mind, and especially the relationship between the Homo faber and thought too.
Yeah, for sure, and that the concluding line of the book when
where she has the Cato quote.
Yeah, never is he more active than when he does nothing. Never is he less alone than when he's by himself. So implicating that mode of thought, right, in the very passage. It
requires all of these prerequisites that she outlines in the book.
Yeah.
It requires labour, it requires work, it requires action, it requires the public sphere, and definitely requires the public realm too. You need to have a space in the world to which you can retreat from public affairs, and within which you can be with yourself and conduct this dialogue with oneself.
Yeah.
Which is how she conceives thought itself.
Yeah, for sure.
But she also understands that thought must be communicated to others, and you can either do that through the work of art, or through writing, through the form of the book.
So in that capacity, I wonder what options are left to us, because the way you just framed it, it seems as though there are there are possibilities, right? And being able to writing is possibly one such possibility, but then we're also surrounded by garbage, like even in this realm of philosophy, or at least what we've given that title. And it makes me wonder what, just say it again, what options are left to us at this point to sort of maintain this idea of the human condition that Arendt has laid out, if that is even possible? Or is it like we're screwed, we've gone too far in this realm of the masses, or in mass society more generally?
I wonder about what we're doing right now, because we're sitting in the same room together and discussing this philosophical text and really diving into these deep issues, and her advocacy for the public realm, for this durable space of the world, is to ensure that this inter-esse between us keeps on going, and it doesn't just kind of evaporate as soon as it comes to an end.
Yeah.
And she appreciates that, you gotta feed yourself. You gotta you have to have dinner at some point.
Yeah.
But before you can have these conversations.
Yeah, the dream of all academics. Like, is there going to be food tonight? I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, you need to take care of these sort of very basic needs. But then there are these points where we can sort of come together and speak together, and disclose what we think in private, disclose who we are to one another, through our speech and through our action, which is distinct from what we are.
Yeah.
For Arendt.
Exactly. So there is the possibility then of realizing this phenomenon today, right? By a sort of transposition, right? Just kind of taking sort of same parameters, the same kind of characteristics indicative of the labor, work, or action, and applying them to the ways in which they may be realized today. Because for us it's like labor is like because at least for us, like, people in school, like, we're pretty well taken care of. We have shelter, basic food, stuff like that. So, like, labor is really like, oh my God, am I going to get, that little extra bit of funding or whatever?
But also bear in mind that the reason that we're able to, the reason we're able to enjoy this privilege is because there are people, who are fighting for minimum wage at Tim Hortons and all of that sort of stuff.
I didn't build this house. Like,
exactly. We are dependent on this sort of web of activity. So, I mean, this is something I kind of find frustrating when people go against, like, Hannah Arendt in seminars, and, like, she's all about this kind of slave morality. I'm like, well, so are we. The whole activity of coming together to speak about these texts nowadays is predicated on a very exploitative system. I mean, with Hannah Arendt, there's a question of whether she deems it as something that's always going to be there, or something that could be replaced by machines. She talks about automation during the book, and sort of finds it a problematic prospect because we live in a society of job holders. And we were discussing this earlier over dinner. Let me indulge in the personal anecdote. When I came here before I started my PhD, I was meeting friends of my landlord, and
what a funny thing.
They asked me what my PhD was in. I was like, I'm studying, I'm doing theory and criticism. And their first question was not like, oh, so what does that mean, or like, what's your research, or what interests you? It was like, what kind of job are you planning to get after that? I'm like, it's 4 years at minimum. I have no idea what kind of job I'm going to.
I don't even know what I'm going to write about yet.
What job I'm going to secure. I mean, no one really knows what they're going to be doing for 4 years. In the next 4 years, after the next 4 years in their life. But for Arendt, she's worried about a society where people can't think or can't imagine the freedom one might have in 4 years of sort of theoretical inquiry without needing the assurance that there's a job at the end of it. And this is why she's worried about automation, because she knows that people associate their self-esteem with their work, or attribute more meaning to holding a job than it's worth.
Because these, whatever we'd consider to be work today does not fit into the same kind of human condition categories that she's laid out, or it doesn't give us that same sort of connection to not only ourselves, to the world. And we take from Marx in that way.
Anyway, except for the artist, she writes about the artist as being this only refuge from the absorption of the homo faber into labour, which is an argument that might not have survived the pop art movement, or like New York in the 80s, where the art market was pretty rapacious, and artists were very conscious of their work as commodities, and especially with people like Warhol, kind of provocatively reflected on that commodification of art, especially in like a piece like Money, which is just a painted dollar sign and it sells for millions. But she writes about art as being arbitrarily priced. So that's another thing. I mean, I do like this idea of the artist as being this identity beyond commerce, and something that might survive this society of labourers, which is also the kind of direction that Marx and Engels go in the German ideology. But I think that since the 80s and the 90s, and definitely into the last 2 decades, the artist has become more of an entrepreneur and more about especially what Foucault describes as the entrepreneurship of the self, and this kind of embodiment of human capital in the sense of the monetization of that which should not be monetized. So I think her last refuge from labour has been infiltrated.
Yeah, for sure, and it makes me pessimistic. Like you gave a nice idea about what we're doing here.
Yeah.
But breaking out of the bounds of not, because it's one thing if we were to take like a sort of Marxist approach, I think it would be more clear as to what would constitute like an anti-capitalist mode of being. Whereas with this, for my own part, I have trouble understanding, or not understanding, I have trouble kind of imagining that possibility of being outside of that thing that she claims that we're in now. Like, we can do this now, but would you and I be talking about this if it wasn't being recorded and for like whatever other purpose? Yeah. Like there, of course, we go to the bar or whatever. We talk about this stuff, but it
definitely has a sort of expediency to it, and it's I mean, as we were talking in the break, I mean, doing this podcast looks good on your CV when you're applying for teaching jobs.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. No, there are other things attached to this for sure.
Which is, I don't know, this is the problematic of the Homo faber, of the struggle between means and ends, of what happens when ends can be taken up as means again. So this conversation is not, I mean, to take the example of, let's say that you talk about this in a cover letter for a teaching position, it's no longer, this conversation is no longer an end in itself, it's no longer this kind of merely theoretical discussion, it's a selling point. It's a means for something else. And the people of action are supposed to secure the meaningfulness of this activity, so it's not just understood as an object that one could use for something else. But for Arendt, you only put people who are using action in a certain sense of the scientists who are introducing processes into the world that weren't there before. And this is why the disappearance of the public sphere is a tragic thing, I suppose, because but that space was a place where meaning could be agreed upon, and it would be stabilized in that space. So what we are doing would have that kind of meaning, this kind of ideal of liberal education, of this non-efficacious learning. That really has no other point than to develop citizenship. And humane intellect, which also really, if you think about how liberal education was conceived in the mid-20th century, and the idea of the liberal education as creating citizenship was just really another means to an end, and it was a way to resist communism. Exactly. At all costs, we have to resist this. But so I think it is. I mean, she's right in the book. It's a real struggle to decide what counts as an end.
Can you say more on that? I think I'm on the same wavelength as you, but I don't know.
Well, in the sense of like, well, I mentioned this earlier. Like this conversation, this podcast, is not just an end in itself. If you choose to use this podcast as an example of your professional skills in academia, and then use that to go for a job. So what is meaningful is something that cannot be utilized for another purpose. And I think this is what she's trying to get in the work of art, because these are the most worldly of objects in the sense that they cannot be used. For another, but they exist for their own purpose. And I think she's writing about a specific milieu that, after this book, just gets completely exploded. It almost kind of exploded before she writes this book, if you consider surrealism and Dada and futurism.
Yeah.
I mean, she's got this very kind of, it's not a romantic idea of what art is, probably more like a Renaissance idea of what art is.
Because otherwise art would subscribe then to that thing that we were talking about, this scientific 2 + 2 = 4 type thing, where there's that progress to it. It's part of a greater system in some form or other. But you're saying that the work of art for Arendt is something that stands not only alone, but is in of itself the only thing that constitutes itself as being like great or excellent, right? It's supposed to stand almost outside of.
Mm-hmm.
God, could it stand outside of culture? I don't know if that's possible. So let's suspend that for now and just say it's something that's just great in and of itself.
Well, it's something that can exist outside the human artifice. Let's say that. Which for Arendt broadly is culture.
Yeah. I feel like there's an absence of that term in here. And then
she doesn't. You're right.
Like what does that look like here? But okay, so if art is what exists outside of human artifice in some capacity, then it stands outside of that realm of the human condition.
No. It links back to immortality and durability.
Yeah.
And art is the most durable of objects of work because it doesn't get used, and so and for Arendt, what wears down durability is usage. So for Arendt, the work of art is the only tangible example of what immortality looks like. It's the work of mortal hands that becomes immortal, and this is what she's trying to demonstrate. What she's trying to illustrate about the idea of immortality, because it depends on the table, but I think I'd be prepared to throw out a table before a work of art, whatever is classified as a work of art, before a painting, let's say.
Yeah, me too. But why, right? For some reason.
Well, but because I don't know. It's just the. Well, for one, because other objects seem more disposable.
Yeah.
And we make less effort to preserve that chair than we do for like a really great photograph or a really beautiful painting.
But it doesn't mean that more labor has necessarily gone in. Like, is it even
very
today?
Very specialized kind of labor, I think.
But you could get right. But
you can have a crappy painting and a really beautiful table.
Yeah, but let's assume, let's assume that the table is not in itself like a work of art. Even like the table I'm using here, like it's just some like a desk. But if you have a work of art that's like if Jackson Pollock just took a paintbrush and threw it at the canvas and sold it to someone, that person would probably be more willing to keep the canvas if they had the choice than keep their dining room table, or let's assume it's just a table, like I just got it at some secondhand maybe or something like that. More labor was put into that table, and that table serves more of a use value, yet it doesn't transcend the work of art that sits on the wall that took a millisecond to make.
It's because I think that the thought process of the work of art is less repeatable than that of the table.
Right. You could never replicate that.
You can make the same table over and over again.
That's a good point.
But I mean, especially with the Jackson Pollock painting. Have you seen a Jackson Pollock in person?
Oh, not in person, no.
Why?
I only have the internet.
In purpose, the depth of the painting is crazy. Like it sticks out an inch over the canvas.
Right.
I mean, like that isn't replicable.
Yeah.
That's completely unique. That's individual to what he was doing that day with the paint. Whereas with the table, the idea is always still in the craftsman's head, and they can do the same piece over and over again.
Yeah.
But this is definitely a Western paradigm for making art. But in the East, especially in China, they have a different conception of preservation. Here in the West, the preservation of the artwork is all about keeping the original and trying to restore it to the point that trying to restore it to what it looked like when it was originally produced. Whereas in China and Japan, the idea of restoration is just creating a completely new copy.
Right. Interesting.
So Arendt's idea of the uniqueness of the work of art operates really great in the West. Doesn't fly so well in the East.
Right. Yeah.
But because of just different conceptions of what preservation and restoration of the work of art mean.
Yeah. Oh, God, that's interesting. I'm going to stew over that one for a while.
Yeah.
Especially as if you start to consider a table that is treated like work of art, like someone like a master crafts.
Well, it's like one of the really great sofas, the Chesterfield or the.
Yeah, I don't know.
You know what I mean, like the
a good sofa.
a great sofa. I mean, like people rave about these items of furniture all the time.
It could be a Chesterfield. I've heard that term before. I don't know if it's like
no. Chesterfield is just something that I've come up with. It's very close. It's also sung about in the Bare Naked Ladies song. So this is Canadian culture. You should understand this.
Full frontal. Bare Naked Ladies are not exactly my cup of tea, but
yeah, but are they your bowl of poutine?
Well, the cup of tea is you, man. The cup of tea is you.
Anyway, where were we?
The table is
the table. Yeah, I mean, this is what the Bauhaus was all about, which I think provides a good counterbalance to Arendt's argument about the work of art and other works of fabrication, with people like the Bauhaus, where they were trying to make these ordinary objects like chairs and tables into works of art. So I feel like Arendt's distinction between the work of art and the product of fabrication doesn't go that far. I mean, if it's great on paper, but if you run with it, then it doesn't. It doesn't go. Doesn't cover the distance.
Yeah.
Or it didn't come up with all these different contingent scenarios.
Yeah.
Arendt is definitely a thinker that you have to take on her own terms.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. No, really, you do.
Yeah.
But I love her for it. I really do like this book. Yeah, I don't know. What else? You got anything else? You want to talk about anything else?
I would like a glass of wine.
All right, we'll stop it there
stop
then.
For a second, yeah. I mean, I could.
So, irreversibility, unreversibility?
Well, no. I mean, I don't know. I have a glass of wine. You have a bottle of rum. So, well, I think we really need to deal with unpredictability first.
Unpredictability. That would fit.
Yeah. So, I mean, for Arendt understands that there are two problems that arise out of action the same way that there are problems that arise out of labour and work. I mean, she's not like an uncritical advocate of action by any means. But what she does conclude is that these problems of action, irreversibility, unpredictability. Earlier in the book, she talks about anonymity as a problem of action, but she doesn't deal with it, or at least she can't find a solution to it. Or at least she doesn't find a solution to it in this book. But in the final sections of action, she talks about the power of forgiveness as a way to cope with the irreversibility of human action, of when you do something in the world and you initiate this process that triggers a chain reaction of reactions and actions. The only thing that can stop that, well, two things can actually stop that when she writes about it. The main one is forgiveness, because that's the one that really looks good on the bumper sticker. But there's also punishment. It's all about a way to bring an end to the beginning that action brings into the world and the unintended consequences that come out of that. And I was thinking late last night when I was reading this section of what are the limits of forgiveness? And I think that she puts it. I think that she provides an answer to this question in the form of a radical evil, and in the sense that Kant puts it. The only thing that actions that should be forgiven are those that have unintended consequences. If you intend to do evil, then you cannot be forgiven. And I think it's difficult to well, how should I put this? I mean, it's difficult to tell what people's intentions are, and I guess this is the basis of our legal system, because you can plead insanity for one instances, and I guess not being in full control of your cognitive faculties means that you're able to be forgiven or able to be punished. Vengeance is different. Vengeance doesn't really bring an end to the process of action, it merely continues it. Forgiveness is the thing that Christianity really adds to politics, in her view. And then there's unpredictability, which we kind of discussed earlier, of providing a kind of stability or a sort of certainty to the human world. And I mean, when we're born into the societies we're born in, we take on certain responsibilities, or people are responsible for us as our guardians. But we have these kind of responsibilities of don't kill anyone, or don't play your music too loud past midnight. Yeah. Those kind of things, which sort of means that people are able to go along their everyday business without fearing for their lives, because if you try to imagine living in a world of complete unpredictability, the fear would paralyze you, I imagine.
Yeah.
So the power to promise means that we can sort of wake up in the morning and just live relatively normal lives. But I mean, and within that, there's the sort of stratification of privilege, which is something that Arendt doesn't address. But I think that it's good that Arendt addresses the shortcomings of action, which take on a strange tone in the section Vita Activa and the Modern Age, where she talks about the process. I mean, where she continues her discussion of the process character of action, and I wondered about global warming in the sense of human beings interfering with natural processes, and that and in these processes continuing or reacting to certain other human actions, and get building in consequence and complexity, because that's where, I mean, that's the most pressing outcome of human action today, I suppose, which would probably outrage Arendt, because it is a threat to not only the human world but the earth, and both of those are really the foundations of any conditions of human life.
Well, that's a nice depressing note to hit there. I don't think there's an optimistic future for Arendt. Like, I don't think that we can kind of reclaim something that she would deem to be, in the service of the good. But I was a little bit confused. I wonder if you could elaborate on it a little more. What role action plays in terms of forgiveness, if any at all?
Let's turn to the text. So here we are.
You just got it like that?
Yes. Just open it straight up.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah, forgiveness. I see. Yes. So forgiveness, in her terms, is not a way of reacting to someone's original action, but a way of acting anew and unexpectedly.
Right. Okay.
Well, this is where her reference to Jesus really plays perfectly, in the sense of turning over the cheek, of not retaliating the way that the other person would expect you to if they'd offended you or trespassed against you, or at least done something to you, or affected you by their actions in a way that they didn't anticipate. So instead of vengeance, which, as I said earlier, is just reaction and is contributing to the process character of the initial action, forgiveness puts an end to the original action and starts a new process. And she writes about it as so she says that forgiving and the relationship it establishes is always eminently personal, though not necessarily individual or private affair, in which what was done is forgiven for the sake of who did it. And then she goes on to talk about love as an anti-political human force.
Right.
And the political equivalent of that being respect, of this kind of basic level of human dignity that we ascribe to one another without being friends or without being kind of intimate with one another. Respect is the force that means you don't like push someone out of the way when you're queuing up for a bus. Which means that like that you know the world is not people just trying to get their own way. In most instances, I mean, like, the world is definitely a product of people trying to seek their own advantage, of course. But the way that we interact with one another, when we perceive one another as equals, is generally respectful.
Yeah.
But then, I mean, we have to consider problems like racism and sexism, which is all the way, which is about withholding.
Those things throw a pretty big wrench in this project.
And which is why, you know, I mean, should we forgive? And this is the question of the Me Too movement, I suppose, if we can drag something contemporary into this discussion of should we go the route of forgiveness, vengeance, or punishment? And punishment is probably the best way, I think. And definitely brings an end to the action. I don't think that is that what was the case? Like the case of someone cutting off someone's penis for sexual assault, something along those lines.
I don't know.
I don't know. I feel like that happened a while ago. But yeah, that's vengeance, and forgiveness is rare. It wouldn't occur in the legal system. I think, as Arendt says, it's something very personal.
Yeah.
I think that as a society, punishment is the way we should deal with crimes. But then, this is where, I mean, Arendt is great at sparking off discussions, but she's not great at ending them. I mean, what is proportional justice? Because, I mean, people from different populations have experienced the force of the law in different ways.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Arendt is the philosopher of worldliness who works as long as the world doesn't get involved.
Yeah, no, that's good. I don't know what else. You got anything else in there?
Well, I've still got a bit of wine left, so I should have something left. I mean, why do you think people have taken up Arendt again? Because, I mean, she's popular again, especially after Trump. I mean, the origin of totalitarianism was a bestseller after the election. It was the wrong book to read after. Sorry. I mean, no. Go back to the second. Go back to the section.
Yeah, it was the wrong book.
No, don't pretend that this is fine. Don't pretend that you didn't press the pause button and then we have to do this whole section again. It was the wrong fucking book to read after the American election, because in the first section of that book, she says that nationalism is different from totalitarianism, and Trump is a nationalist. So I think the origins of totalitarianism was the wrong book to read after the American election. The Human Condition isn't even the fucking right book to read after the American election. I don't know. What is the right book to read after a political event like this?
I don't know.
What is the right book for our time? Why is Arendt selected as one of the guides for us? Because, as we've discussed, there are a lot of things she puts in this book that are outdated and impractical and irrelevant. But she's popular, and maybe it's just the readability of her prose. Maybe it's just because the people with the rights to her books have more money, so are able to publish it quicker. Who knows what the reasons are? I mean, but we're definitely at a stage where people are desperate for answers of some sort or another.
And then they play on to the science thing, like the Neil deGrasse Tyson or the Sam Harris types that give them that purport to give them these answers, right? To get them out of these holes, these ruts.
Well, I mean, definitely with Steven Pinker. I think that Steven Pinker's new book on the Enlightenment has just come at the time. After the Trump election, where a lot of liberal-minded people are like, "Oh my God!" Like this is the classic Obama phrase of. The arc of history may be long, but it tends towards justice.
Yeah.
And a lot of people who are liberal-minded sort of latched onto that and like, yeah, America is just generally tending towards this more socially liberal society. All we need to do is just reform and reform and reform. And then Trump happens. And they're like, oh my goodness, maybe history isn't linear. And then Steven Pinker comes along and goes, no, just look at these graphs.
We're on the way up.
We're on the way up.
We're gonna get there.
And he doesn't take account of rupture at all, and doesn't take account of the passions behind reason. And Arendt, to a certain extent, doesn't do that either. I do wonder where she puts passion in her conceptual system at all, because she's definitely critical of Plato prioritizing reason over passion, but then she doesn't really have it anywhere in her book at all, except for love. But love for her is definitely a anti-political force. So maybe she is just as guilty of the crimes that we accuse of these other kind of pseudo-enlightenment figures of our own time. Maybe people were having the same discussion about Arendt in the 50s and 60s of going like, she's just this liberal apologist who's... No, actually, no. I don't think that would happen. I mean, she's too pessimistic for that sort of stuff.
Yeah. She wouldn't fit into that category neatly. It's too complicated for that. And I don't want to just give it credit based on its complexity, but it seems as though this isn't intended for just anyone.
No.
Right? This is a very difficult text, at least I think. Whereas I feel like those texts that come out today there is it is part and parcel of that system of equalization, that kind of the social, in a sense, rendering accessible everything to everyone.
It's like what Ortega y Gasset talks about in The Revolt of the Masses, right? About how the problem with massification, which Arendt would describe as mass society, is the fact that the commonplace, knowing itself to be commonplace, demands that everything else is commonplace and completely rejects anything else that's nonconformist, anything that could be described as excellence, anything that could be described as abnormal. And this is the problem with the masses. I think that this is the audience for what might be described today as the pseudo-enlightenment. They're writing for the general reader, and the general reader doesn't exist. It's a subject position that ordinary people have to adopt.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, to go off on a tangent, like Derrida completely detested this type of thinking, that there was this general reader, because the reader was always, moving around in their own position. There was no sort of general reader to begin with. I mean, the whole idea of a general reader is patronizing. It's a sense that someone can't be capable of the type of higher thought or specialization that the author is capable of, or that the expert is capable of.
Yeah. Yeah, I would certainly agree. But I don't know. Is there anything else? You got anything more to add? We recorded a whole bunch of this, but we lost it.
What? You lost it.
I paused the track at some point.
Yeah.
I'm very unbeknownst to myself.
To be honest, that would have probably been the most durable part of the podcast.
Don't say that. I was thinking about that.
No, I mean, where the discussion went after that was a bit more passionate because we were both frustrated about the loss of the recording. So I think it was for the better.
It could be. Well, anything? Any last words? You got
any last words? I think that the Human Condition is just one of those texts that you need to reread. I mean, there's a great line by Calvino about classics of classics are the books that people say they're always rereading. You know.
Yeah.
In the sense of, and it's kind of criticism of like pretentiousness in literary circles. Like, you don't want to accept that you're reading this book for the first time. And I think the Human Condition is one of those books that everyone needs to read for the first time, and then really from that point forward they need to keep
read for the first time, and then read for the first time.
Well, it's definitely one of those books that feels fresh every time you pick it up.
Yeah.
And that's it's a rarity.
No, it's a great book, and I like this. Like I said a little earlier, I think of all the thinkers that I'm like, kind of like, I have my reservations about, like, kind of problematic. I'm like, but Hannah Arendt really like sticks to me. I have trouble justifying Heidegger, but I really like Arendt.
Yeah.
She's a great writer. Mm-hmm. I really like, and I like what she's saying. But I guess on that note, we can sign off.
Yeah, we can conclude.
For anyone that has any beef for us, if you're out
there, if you're out
there and you actually listen to
still
this,
listening.
I say that at the end every time. Yeah. If anyone actually made it this far, and you think that we said something dumb or you disagree with us, YouTube has a comment section for a reason. Make it apparent. But otherwise, say goodbye, Andrew.
Yeah, goodbye. See you again soon. Well, speak to you again soon, and we'll never see each other.
Yeah, no. We hope. That'd be creepy.
We never talked about the space of appearance as reality for Arendt, but maybe that'd probably be fitting for a podcast. That's totally oral.
When we come, we were talking about doing another talk on like another author here, but for now, for any of those that listen this far, thanks a lot, and we'll see you later.